Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 9 of the ESG Experience, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. Whether you're an ESG expert or just dipping your toes into the ESG universe, this podcast is for you. Together, we'll navigate the alphabet soup of ESG, share strategies, and discuss industry news and trends. I'm Helee, SVP of ESG Operations at Conservice. New title, first time I've ever used it.
Yeah, I like it. It's smooth. I'm Ryan Nelson, SVP and General Manager of ESG at Conservice.
Also smooth. Very nice. First time using
good
titles with you, Jim.
So. That sounds great. I'm honored.
Yeah. And we are honored to have you, Jim Massey, Chief Sustainability Officer of Xi Lab, to discuss putting trust into action to tackle big problems, cultivating and institutionalizing organizational purpose, creating cultures designed to help teams thrive, and more. And Jim, this is the part where I embarrass you. I read your bio, so if everyone could see your face turning red as I talk about your accolades, accomplishments. So Jim is recognized as a global thought leader on trust, sustainability, and ethics. On the front lines of business transformation, he has led and developed groundbreaking programs ranging from Ambition Zero Carbon, one of the world's boldest corporate environmental programs, to launching the first corporate trust report, which I look forward to hearing more about because I have not heard of all the CSR reports and different types of reporting we do. A corporate trust report is not one I have heard of personally, which lays out a blueprint for how businesses can build trust with a wide range of stakeholders. Jim has a Master's of Science in Organizational Development from Johns Hopkins University and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Missouri. So you're a Midwesterner at heart. That's why I liked you. I knew there was a reason. He is married to Emily, and they enjoy the struggle of the juggle. It's good. As they pursue their life's work and raise Sawyer and Lawson. Family loves the outdoors, travel, and finding their next adventure. Well, welcome.
Thank you. It is a lot.
Struggle is something I might use in my everyday vernacular now that I've learned it from you.
Please do. When I heard, I shamelessly stole as well, but it sums up life's work.
Yeah,
the best it can.
Yeah, good. Well, yeah. Welcome again, Jim, and great to have you. Before we jump in here, if you don't mind, I love this first question we have coming, but free question, what I learned about you. You visited all 50 states, is that true? And you have a plan to conquer all 7 continents. My question is, how did you visit these 50 states? Was this RV or jet plane? How did you accomplish this? Was this kind of a pandemic thing, or what? Just give us what that was like.
Ryan, I tell you, and this connects to Helee's notion. I'm a Midwesterner, right? And my son is Sawyer. My mom taught folklore, and Tom Sawyer, and a quote that's been attributed to him is, the enemy of bias and discrimination and hatred is travel. And my favorite quote is, there is no narrow mind with a thick passport. And so it was an obligation we had with so I'm a Midwesterner, my wife's a Midwesterner, but our children are Washingtonians, born and raised in a bubble. And we wanted them to see what the world could be. So we decided in 4 years to take the kids on 50 states for elementary school education. And we did it while working. And we were supposed to hit the 7 continents before they went to high school, but the pandemic shut us down. And so we ended up doing another 35,000 miles to the U.S. again, visiting 30 more states, for the second time. And then this July, we will finish as a family the 7 continents when we go to Australia. So COVID couldn't stop us, but we're doing it.
You did Antarctica? Isn't that the hardest one to get to?
It is. We did that over winter break in 2022 to 20. We spent New Year's on the continent.
Wow. That's cool.
Amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Those quotes are I've never exactly stared those down, but that sentiment I think of all the time. I mean, if you travel well, if you meet a lot of people, discriminations start to seem to go away. So that's really cool that you intentionally did that for your children and yourselves. I like that a lot.
And I'll tell you, we were just in Borneo. And the reason we went to Borneo was, in my previous job at AstraZeneca, having one of the world's first net zero programs validated by science-based targets, we were doing the net positive aspect of planting trees. one of the projects was in the jungles of Borneo to help with the orangutan habitat. And so, my boys always made fun of bring your child to work day, because my work was never easily seen in the labs where I brought them. So I'm like, by golly, my wife's a journalist. They got to see her at CNN. They were on the set with her. I'm like, I'm going to take them to my work. And so we're in a riverboat in the jungles of Borneo, and a wild orangutan is we see a wild orangutan, which was rare. But it's also the experience of, not far from there was the solo farming of the monoforest for palm oil. So they're seeing firsthand the issue of the Western need for sooty soap and palm oil, and we've got to be eradicating that. So it's sparking a fire in them, as I see it already for younger generations, but just letting them realize the impact they can have even living in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, again, well done. It's inspiring me to get back out there on the road and travel a little bit. And like you said, there can't be anything more valuable than seeing an issue or meeting a human firsthand, and engaging in reality. And then when you go and you talk about issues or discrimination or trust or something like that, you have a real firsthand experience that's really cool.
I want to know,
so it's
for that, if you hit the 50 states and the 7 continents, like, are you going to go to Mars or something? Like,
or the moon, maybe.
Still have some good some life left in you.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's the amazing thing as a parent, is I can't wait to see where my boys go, right? And what they want to do.
Yeah.
And then just finding the next adventure. But that's the other fascinating part of what COVID taught us, is we were so focused on a suitcase and going far. The adventure sometimes is the park literally behind our house, when that's as far as we were allowed to go. And so there was a lot of reframing we had to do about it. It wasn't about travel, it was about adventure and human connection.
Yeah.
And for at least the first 3 months of COVID, it was us reconnecting with what was literally outside our back door. So I'm not sure where we're going next. Kind of like, in all things ESG, right? It's always evolving.
I'll have to follow you if you have like a blog or something of all your travels.
So here's what's fascinating is the boys we have a family travel book coming out in the fall.
Oh, cool.
Called Geo Kids, 50 States on School Breaks, just trying to encourage any unit. For us, it was a
Great.
family unit to work together to go find that.
I love that.
Well, yeah, it sounds like part of the hopefully not too much of a struggle, but part of the juggle that you're doing, writing books, solving world problems, getting your children well-rounded, and trying to inspire leaders to solve the world's problems. So it seems like one of your big themes or things that you're passionate about is trust.
Yes.
Your book, I think it was called Trust in Action, just dropped. So excited about that. So maybe just tell us, what is the inspiration to even write a book about the role of trust? It does seem like a very relevant thing to be talking about right now.
Yeah. For me, you described, I'm a behavioralist at heart, right? I've been studying and trying to influence human behavior since I was in the 3rd grade, helping with the first Congress campaign in Missouri. So from an early age, I was learning, you got to influence people to do something. Well, throughout my career, I've always felt that trust was an important piece of it. And so my book really focuses on the 3 elements of trust: can, care, do. Am I able? Am I capable? Do I care? Do I have others' interests at heart? And then do I do what I say I will? And so this was rooted in all this research. One of the biggest criticisms of management theory is it never gets put into practice. But I'm a quirky person that I know there's a reason why the research was done. And as a leader trying to make change, I try to apply it. But it was too complicated. So I just started synthesizing all this data, simplified the model. And then after 2 decades of doing that, I realized at the time of COVID, the murder of George Floyd, the extreme weather we're experiencing, leaders were worried about these larger systems, and they were losing trust in themselves. And so I realized this thing that I was taking for granted could help so many people at a time when we need action, and we can't sit back and wait for others to do it. So the reason I wrote this book is I genuinely believe the way we're going to fix the world's problems is by transforming ourselves to change our behavior, to change those around us, to change the larger system.
I love how you use the word currency, like that trust is a currency. And that's an interesting concept because, like you said, so it's universal, right? So you go across country lines, continent lines, wherever you go. Like trust is a concept that really does transcend, any sort of culture or any sort of like socioeconomic class. So I love thinking about it in that way. And then even just in the corporate context, I mean, it's essentially, again, going back to the word currency, one of the most valuable things that you can have as a leader, right, is the people that you lead having trust in you and faith in you and taking things you say at face value. But that doesn't happen right away. I mean, it's something that you build over time. Like you said, you do what you say you're going to do time and time and time and time again until you really just become someone that's reliable, someone that people can believe in and trust in, someone that people can get behind. So yeah, I love that word, as trust as a currency.
Well, and for me, it's the basis of everything. When more than one of us are together, and I even say, even when I'm by myself, do I trust myself? Do I believe that I'm able to do it? Do I care enough about myself to take the action? And will I eventually act? And it's I'm probably jumping around here a little too much, but that's one of the reasons I wrote, when we ran our first report, I call it the ESG Trust Report, because most ESG reports are all about aspiration, and then there's a little trickling of here's how we're achieving it. I try to always balance and bring up front, the priority of why the company exists, and then how we are addressing those biggest issues. And then I surround it with, and by the way, we acknowledge there's a lot of other how we do things that we don't want to harm the world or people. And so, ironically, greenhouse gas emissions is not what I lead with my report, even though it's the biggest crisis. But we're not in agriculture, we don't extract, we don't distribute, we're not in transportation. So that's not where we can have our greatest impact. We're focused on SDG 3, health and well-being, because that's where we can transform the world. And it's balancing that. This is where we are the most capable, and then proving how we're showing and demonstrating that by reaching 1 million patients at a certain point in time.
So you talk about, as leaders, as business leaders, that we're being asked to address some of the world's biggest challenges. I want to run this list down that I grabbed from you for a second, because it's wild. So you just talked about SDG 3, and that your organization, Zai Lab, has its own mission and it's developing products and it's doing really cool things. So there's that. But now as leaders, and I guess I've had to experience some of this, and just to think of it's wild, but define new ways of working post-COVID. Like literally, how are we supposed to be working and communicating? Eliminate inequalities, protect employees from climate change, geopolitical disruptions, and ultimately save our planet. Like I do feel like some pressures beyond like delivering what we're supposed to be doing for our job, those other things too, which is wild to me. So it's cool that you actually wrote that down, listed it, and then I'm gathering that that's what your book is addressing. Is like, hey, leaders, you kind of do need to do these things, not just the things that were in your job description. You have to do these things. I think that's a wild idea.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do, Ryan, is connect. And there's all these technical things, right? We criticize Milton Friedman's philosophy, the business of business is business. But it's also about the context of where that is into stakeholder capitalism today, is we're depleting natural resources and we put profits ahead so much. And I think what I was experiencing, and I have experienced, is leaders are overwhelmed by all of this. There was a time when the world's shutting down. They're being asked to talk about D&I, and most don't even know the acronym: diversity, equity,
right.
and then we've added belonging. And so one of the important
I don't even believe in it still, which is, tough pill to swallow for me.
But right, Helee, and even what that means is different for each of us, because we're often looking through the lens of which we feel the most marginalized, because we are always thinking about what's in it for me, especially from the Western American perspective, right? It's much less about the collective and much more about the individual. So the book talks a lot about society's losing trust in systems. Boy, and it's overwhelming with social media and the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah.
And I keep asking people, dive into that, but come back to where you know you are most capable to have the greatest impact, and then pull out of the white noise. I'm like, it's like a bungee. Jump into the water, pull out that cup and say, I can control this cup. Transform that cup, throw it back in, then dive back in,
Yep.
And that's what I'm trying to, because otherwise there's just inaction. And I was raised to believe action beats inaction every time. And if we just continue to be overwhelmed, we
Yes.
aren't going to make changes.
I totally agree. And I think it does come from a sense of like, not that people don't want to do something. I think a lot of people do want to do something and they want to leave their fingerprint on, this planet in the brief time that they're here, but overwhelmed is the right word, or just inundated or almost paralyzed by all this information. And it's not just the amount and the plethora of information. It's like the conflicting information, right? So anytime I get in a debate with a friend or something, we'll look it up. You can find a point to support almost anybody's point, right? Like you could have two completely conflicting points and everyone can find some resource somewhere that's going to back whatever point they want. So it's almost like there's no truth anymore. Like there's no true source of truth, which can be overwhelming. But I agree. You got to just sift out the noise, or almost like shut it off a little bit, because if all you're doing all day, every day is taking in, all this information, all these inputs, it does become overwhelming, and then you can't focus on what you can do. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine. I had to do some interviews for a project I was working on. And one of the asks is like, how has your outlook changed, from a business perspective on what impact you're going to have, say like in your early career, now like in your middle career. And what everyone said is like, you set out as a bright-eyed 22-year-old being like, I'm going to change the world. Like I'm going to go out there. I'm going to have this huge impact. I'm going to change the world. And then maybe you get humbled, maybe even cynical, and you come back around and you're like, you know what, I might not cure cancer and I might not be the one to solve global warming single-handedly, but I do have influence and the ability to impact within just my circle, whatever that may be, day to day, a few people here and there, hyper focusing on a cause. And I think that's where people find the most fulfillment, because they can really move the needle within the context of, something smaller that has impact, that's meaningful, and that certainly adds up. I have a question for you though. So, okay, in thinking about like the CSR, like the corporate social responsibility reports we do, and just sustainability reporting in general, so much of it is tied to like KPIs and metrics. Like you talked about, you guys don't really do carbon because that's not the nature of your business. But how do you, like, what's a KPI for trust? Like, how do you quantify it or measure it? Because it feels like an abstract concept.
It absolutely is, and it's a challenge to measure. So that's what I'm exploring now. I'm looking at, in particularly, how individuals can measure it within an organization. And so I'm developing a trust survey that will help leaders do that. Right now, we use Pew Family Trust. We use Edelman to go out and survey people and say, what is trust? And that's one of the reasons I want to bring my model forward in the book, is because the can, care, do are ways in which we can qualitatively measure, right? So as a leader, if I'm sitting there and something's not happening with my team or with other function within my organization, I'm always running through what's inhibiting action right now. Is it they don't trust that I'm able to discuss this? Do they not believe that? Do they think I'm just trying to get a promotion? Am I just worried about myself? Do they not see what's in it for them? Or is it literally, we just need to get out of this room and go do it? And so like, I'm always running through that because I have no other way to officially measure. Mm-hmm. I hate using this analogy, but it goes back to kind of the Supreme Court ruling on pornography. I forget which justice it was. They said it's hard to define, but you always know it when you see it. Trust is one of those things that it's dependent on each person, but time and time again, what all the researchers have given me and what I have said through my own experiences, capability, caring, and action are the three things. And ultimately where people start is the action. The company or the leader doesn't do what they say they do. Talking about remote work earlier, Ryan, everyone be in the office, but the leader never goes in the office. And so all of a sudden, the direct reports are there. No one else is like, well, why am I coming in? Leader is not here. They're not going to see me. So that starts to erode trust because you're not doing what you say you will. It's a great question, Helee. And any advice, if you know of something, point me and I'll go do.
No, I'll think about it. I have a couple ideas, but I can't give the pearls of wisdom out to our hundreds of thousands of listeners before I vetted them by you first, Jim. So.
Well, it feels like a survey, I think, which is what you said, part of it doing. simply ask the stakeholders around you if they trust you. Seems like a pretty effective way to know if they trust you. I was just thinking about something while you were explaining that. Do you talk? I'm curious, as a leader, how might you get others to trust themselves? Is that covered at all? So I'll suggest that I trust myself, and I want to do what I say so that I can build the trust, so that others will trust me. But I feel like a lot of times, to your point, people get stuck or maybe don't speak up or don't engage enough because they don't trust their own subject matter expertise or their ability to say something properly or something like that. Have you covered that at all, or no? And like,
a little bit, yes. And I can tell you, as a practitioner, so at any given time in organizations, I've had multiple direct reports. And Ryan, I will literally sit there. If someone comes to me with a problem and they're struggling, I'll run through this. I don't necessarily walk them through can, care, do. I'm like, okay, you're stuck. Why is that? Well, I don't know what this team's not doing what I want them to. Okay, so there, I automatically go into care. The team does not believe you as a leader have their interests at heart. So we start to explore what's holding them back from behavior. They probably think it's an agenda. If you're in my sustainability team, they think you're trying to slow them down or hurt their budget this year. So we've got to convey why doing this action is going to help them achieve something they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've been there. I've been asked to take on a new team, and I've literally had the team sit there and say, you are not qualified to sit in that position. I was asked to take on a group of subject matter leading experts in environment as a consumer marketer. What I had to help them realize is I am, because I'm the leader of this group, right? You are the subject matter experts and you cannot see above this. I didn't use those terms, right? I have a little bit more.
It's always a tough one.
Yeah, my context is I appreciate your feedback. Let's work together. And then what I was able to realize is the lack of trust had nothing to do with me taking action or do they think I care. I started going and reading and researching my own background on environment so I could go toe to toe on the details with them. And that's when I realized the trust was not an issue with me, but I did need to learn on environment. So I did that. And that's how I was able to convince them to go to be one of the leading environmental programs in the world today.
Nice. So Jim, what happens when a community or organization sees a breakdown in trust? What's the downside of this?
I think when there's a breakdown of trust, you see polarization. I think you see anger. I think you see fear. I think you see what I see when I go home for the holidays and sit around a table of 30 plus adults who are uncertain how to navigate multiple topics. And that's another reason I wanted to write this is, I truly believe I live in an amazing world and I want people to be able to talk and listen to one another. I believe in human connection. And I think when there is a lack of trust in a community, there's several things. There's a lack of action. And so we're at a critical time where we've got to be changing some major societal behaviors. And because we're at odds, I'll speak about the US here. We have states that are more worried about the rights of women athletes, yet we don't, because of transgender sports, transgender participation in sports, where there are states trying to define new, just the other day, I think it was the state of Kansas or North Dakota was coming out with defining what a woman is. And yet we have such bigger issues from my perspective that we need to be addressing than worrying about that detail. And for me, Ryan, that's an example of what happens when trust breaks down in society. We start focusing on things that aren't the most relevant and most material for us when we're fighting for our lives.
And I think one thing, if you think about too, so people can have like differing views, right? Like, so this is one thing. Sometimes you find it hard to work with people that aren't like you or that have you could have completely opposing views on, say, politics or any of the plethora of issues at hand today. But if there's a trust between you as in a mutual respect, a working respect, I do feel like you can put those kinds of differences behind you and still be effective as a team and still be effective as a diverse team and kind of just agree to disagree. Because I think with the trust does come, the respect that you need to create and foster a team dynamic. One thing I was going to ask you about, okay, there's this concept here of building cultures that can help empower teams to thrive. Do like teams thrive anymore? Or is everyone just like jaded and working virtually and switching jobs and taking the next thing from the recruiter? Like, how do you make my 2023, April 26, 2023 take on this is, how do you make a virtual team thrive? How do you breathe energy into little Zoom squares that are barely enthused to wake up and move from the bed to the desk?
Right. I think having conversations, one of the big things I learned is I've conditioned, if someone asks me, how are you? I used to say, I'm fine. But, today, Helee, I disclosed right before we started this, I'm a little under pressure. We have this big report due for this. And I'm trying to lead from the front on vulnerability that everything's not fine. And I have those conversations. I often ask people, if it's the first time I'm meeting them, what did you learn during COVID that you're changing for the better when you're coming back to work now? And it's just, I'm trying to have different conversations, because what I keep coming back to, people say that it's impossible to connect over screen, but I've had some of my most amazing conversations with humans I have never physically met and may never. But because we can see one another and we're willing to ask different questions and answer differently, we're able to make a stronger, deeper connection. So that's what I would recommend is be, we as humans are meant to connect. And so if others aren't doing that and the team isn't doing that, I would just challenge anyone listening, be the different one. Try to engage, set up a one-on-one, start to prove something differently, because we need that connection. And it's not just in our homes or in our personal lives, we need them in our workspaces as well.
I like that. I mean, there's definitely an element of just being real. Like, even if you're a leader, you're still a person. You might have a good day, a bad day, and you don't always have to exude this vibe that like everything's fine, everything's great. Like, it's okay to, to your point, to be vulnerable. And even to the point of building trust, like transparency, I find is very helpful. We've talked about it a lot, I think, today already. But oftentimes, like, the disconnect, or why people don't trust leadership, or why they don't trust senior leadership or executive leadership, is there's so many layers removed, and by the time a decision or a directive gets to them, they're like, well, that's dumb. Like, I that doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? But if you kind of explain, when you're delivering that information, the thought process behind it. So, like, I don't know, 9 times out of 10, the executive leadership team are not bad people, right? They're doing the best they can with the information that they have, and they're picking a decision, and they're going down a path. So if you explain, like, the thought process behind, like, here's the decision, but here's what went into it, and here's the thought process, I find that people tend to accept that information better, and then they will be a bit more trusting with that context. And assuming it's not like confidential, it doesn't cost you anything to to share that information. So that's an approach that I often take, is like, when I'm delivering information, I'll often explain like how people arrived there, so that everyone can feel good about the decision that maybe they weren't part of, but they could still get behind it.
Absolutely. And I think too, for me, Helee, one of the things I always ask people is also, don't try, perfection's the enemy of good, right? And so you may not like this decision, but just roll with it, right? I think we often like to default, no matter what level we are in the organization. Boy, they don't get it. That, as soon as you start using pronouns, it's so easy. It goes back to what happens when society loses trust. It's them, it's other. And with my trust model, I always try to get people to come back to, what is it you're doing to make the change? And then, if a decision's made, roll with it. And then we can always continue to evolve and improve. So provide your feedback. Don't just criticize, but make it better. If it's really that big of a deal, then take action to make it better and help the company, because ideally everyone in the organization is on the same mission to fulfill what it is we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can see how those things you're describing would be more productive or more easily accomplished in a trusting situation, where I'm inclined to roll with it because I want to demonstrate trust in my leadership. So I'm inclined to do those things. You reminded me, talking about connectivity 5 years ago, I used to say, you'd say, how you doing? And if someone actually told me, I would be like, oh, geez. And then I'd be like, this person described for like 3 minutes how they were doing. That wasn't the point. It was just a greeting. But now, to your point, I say it even a little more sincerely, like, how are you, today, or something like that. So that was, I don't know, somewhat humorous
It's the same
change to me. And
like, with kids, if you say like, how was school day? Fine. What'd you do?
Yes.
What'd you do? Nothing. But if you like ask very specific questions, like, what did you do at this class with this person? Or how is this specific thing? Like, yes, it's all in the ask, like how you frame the question, for sure.
And I think it even goes back to as leaders, right? And Ryan, I'm glad you triggered this for me. How are you doing is not a greeting, but I've always used it as one. A greeting is hello, hi, but when you're asking a question I started my career in sales. How are you is an open-ended question. You need to be prepared. And so as a leader, if I'm not prepared for that, then I need to either go with a declarative greeting, hello, and then let's talk business. But think of how much of that we own. And that goes back to the connection we're trying to create. So I'm glad you said that, because it helped me bring it full circle.
No, it's a interesting concept, and a lot of these things are, I don't know, post-pandemic things. And to your point, I don't like to say silver lining necessarily, but it also reminded me about the connectivity that's been enhanced because video meetings, became normal, and that's been great. I've also had very good, more robust, real conversations because of video meetings that weren't happening before. So I agree with that concept.
And to your point about the silver lining, so I've been talking a lot about we're losing trust in systems and things can be overwhelming. One of my favorite chapters in the book is called Stepping into the BS, because I differentiate between the natural system of planet Earth and all that connects us, and the human need to try to control it all. So we create these systems, and we're losing trust in the systems we've created: government, religion, education, business. So everything that I think we are worried about, my final line on the book dedication is you trust yourself. It's time to act, be and do good, because we can fix the systems we've created. Even on this podcast, if we're not happy with it, you two created it, you can redirect me at any point in time, and so it's just, we actually are much more in control of that, which is frustrating us significantly right now.
Yeah, and if there's a takeaway, at least for me or for the listeners, I really like the bungee jump analogy of get in there, learn something, come back to you, and then do something, action, right?
Yeah.
Like I really like that analogy.
I agree. All right, is it game time?
It's game time. Jim, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your inspiration for the book. I am gonna grab it. It's available as of this month. Was it earlier this month?
April 10th. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the methodology is can, care, do, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I want to dive into those a little bit more. But our listeners are definitely excited about this silly short little game that we play. It's a 50-50. Pardon, Helee?
Oh, I just said it's the fan favorite.
It is a fan favorite. It's called Beans or Beer. It's real easy. All you have to do is say whether this company that I mentioned makes coffee or if they make beer. It's one or the other. I'm going to be honest. You can trust me. It's one or the other.
No, it could be both. We've had some both.
No, but I would say that ahead of time.
Oh, you would say, okay.
Can I disclose something?
Yes.
I drink neither, so I will probably be the worst participant you've ever had on this game.
Well, Jim, it's 50-50. This one is called Trust Tree Brewing Company.
Beer.
All right, the answer is going to come at the end of this paragraph I'm going to read. So we get to know Trust Tree Brewing Company a little bit. There's always some reason I select these. Obviously, trust was our theme today. But this is a really cool company from what I gathered out of Australia. It says, we want to do something we love while giving back at the same time. Our dream is to make Trust Tree the cleanest and greenest microbrewery in Australia and share our journey for all to see, for better or for worse. They have a program called Drink 1% Better is at the heart of everything we do. And our pledge to not only keep Trust Tree as lean and green as possible, but pledging our support to the planet to bring about real change while also brewing a top beer. So yes, it's beer. You're correct. Congratulations. You win.
What does he win, Ryan?
And yeah, you win the game. This is not all about prizes. I trust that you will feel some joy in winning the game, and that's what you get. But yeah, and I'm always happy to show off organizations that, which is pretty regular and pretty easy to find right now, organizations that have some level of commitment above and beyond the product that they're selling or making. So kudos to them.
Good job, Jim. Big winner. You came here to do a podcast, you walk away a big winner.
That's right.
Enjoy.
That's what we do here at the ESG Experience. And on that note, this has been another episode of the ESG Experience podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed your time with us, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. And there is a new episode every month. We appreciate our loyal subscribers for continuing to support our podcast. And if you want to follow the conversation between episodes, look at your favorite social media channel with hashtag ESG Experience. And Jim, thanks again.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.